Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and one of the first podcasts on the Internet. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1405 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The ARRL announces a leadership change among the ARRL directors. We will have all the details. FCC Chairman Carr announces a vote to expand the 900 MHz band to 10 MHz. The ARRL Student Coding Competition is now underway and holds a $25,000 award. The Dayton Hamvention announces the theme for the 2026 show. NASA selects participants to track the Artemis II mission. Amateur Radio Digital Communications announces funding opportunities for amateurs. Registration is now open for the ARRL-hosted AMSAT 2026. AMSAT is looking for a feature story editor and also a video editor. We will tell you about the positions. Iran continues blocking all Internet traffic. The International Amateur Radio Union has issued a clarification on reports of the prosecution of amateur radio operators in Belarus. The World Radio Communication Conference Advisory Committee schedules its fourth meeting coming up on February 19th. And an astronaut aboard the space station has taken a great photograph of the Artemis II launch pad. We will tell you all about this and a lot more amateur radio news coming up in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Ben Shop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio continues with Part 7 of his series entitled Building a Shack. In this edition, Onno looks at different methods of powering your shack. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. In this edition, Will takes a look at the early history of WWV. On the air since 1920, WWV began as a source of news from the Department of Agriculture, broadcast on CW. It also experimented with Friday evening concert broadcasts. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, HJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming contests, and a lot more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside of Albany, New York, where Snowmageddon left us with a little over 2 feet of snow, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in Cortlandville, New York, and the Igloo, which is my shack at the moment, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
Reporting from our studio in sunny Bradenton, Florida, where I hope to activate a minimum of 2 parks per week over the next month, I'm Mike Nikolich, Kilo 9 Delta X-Ray Mike.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2 Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting from our news bureau in beautiful Sandwich, Illinois, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
Coming to you from a rather nippy but still sunny Space Coast in Florida, I'm Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, which has been converted into an igloo, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where we've just survived a week of nightly below zero temperatures, and the wood stove needs feeding again. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we've been digging out from under an unusual amount of white stuff. I think the meteorologists call it snow. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
During the past week, ARRL CEO and Secretary David A. Minster, NA2AA, sent the following email to ARRL members. John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this special report from League headquarters.
In a message emailed to all ARRL members on January 28th, CEO David Minster, NA2AA, shared news of a recent change in leadership within the Atlantic Division. Atlantic Division Director Robert B. Flaminglio, K3RF, became ineligible to continue serving after voluntarily choosing not to submit an annual recertification statement as required under ARRL Bylaw 46. As a result, the director position was vacated in accordance with the bylaw. The board member statement on authority, responsibility, and expectations, which you can see at www.arrl.org/general information, confirms that board members have read and understand their fiduciary obligations under ARRL's governing documents and applicable law. Signed statements were completed by all 36 other board members, as well as all candidates who stood for election during 2025. We sincerely thank Director Flaminglio for his many years of volunteer service and for his contributions to ARRL and the amateur radio community, included Minster. Consistent with ARRL cessation procedures, Vice Director Marty Newingham, AG3I, has assumed the role of Atlantic Division Director effective immediately. A replacement Vice Director will be named at a later date. Newingham lives in Greenburgh, Pennsylvania, and was previously appointed Vice Director in 2025 in July. He is an ARRL Life member and a gold-level contributor to the ARRL Diamond Club. He'll serve the remainder of the term that expires December 31st, 2026. You can read the full member bulletin at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD&IDJ.
ARRL remains committed to adherence to its governing documents and to keeping members informed regarding board governance, leadership transitions, and organizational continuity. We appreciate our members' engagement and ongoing support.
Federal Communications Chairman Brendan Carr announced that the Commission will vote on an order that maximizes the potential of the 900 megahertz band by enabling broadband deployment across all 10 megahertz of the band. This vote is the culmination of the joint petition filed by Anterix, Ameren, Enterprise Wireless Alliance, Energy, Lower Colorado River Authority, Portland General Electric, San Diego Gas and Electric, among others, seeking authority to expand the 900 megahertz broadband segment from 6 megahertz to 10 megahertz. According to the chairman, the FCC is advancing efforts to expand broadband use and create new opportunities for utilities and critical infrastructure providers. He shared that his action builds on our previous work to realign the band through a market-driven transition and reflects our commitment to ensuring that spectrum is used efficiently and in ways that strengthen the American economy. The report and order will be voted on during the FCC's Open Commission meeting scheduled for Wednesday, February 18th of 2026. Anterix Chief Regulatory and Corporate Communications Officer Christopher Gutman McCabe said, Anterix is extremely excited to see the chairman's announcement and incredibly grateful to the chairman and his team, as well as the staff at the FCC. As the chairman stated, the Commission's proposal to authorize a market-based transition to 10 MHz broadband in the 900 MHz band builds directly on the proven success of the FCC's 2020 action establishing the 6 MHz broadband allocation. The utilities deploying 900 MHz private wireless broadband networks have launched a transformation of the nation's grid communications capabilities, enhancing grid security, reliability, and resilience for millions of Americans, and advancing our nation's security and prosperity. The Open Commission meeting, scheduled for February 18th, will be webcast live with a replay available to the public.
The ARRL is asking members to help encourage licensed youth in their communities to participate in the ARRL Student Coding Competition, an initiative focused on developing practical resources for the amateur radio service. Reporting from League headquarters, here's John Ross, KD8IDJ, with more on the competition.
The competition, which began January 1st, 2026, challenges young amateurs to create a mobile application that ARRL will use as a long-term learning resource. Rules and app specifications were released on January 1st and are available at coding.arrl.org. The competition centers on building a useful, accessible FCC exam preparation app for iOS devices. The app must support technician, general, and extra class license exam and use the official NCVEC question pools. Judging will focus on usability, clarity, stability, and code quality, qualities that ensure the finished product can serve as a dependable study resource for current and future radio amateurs. Eligibility is limited to ARRL members to age 21 or younger who hold a U.S. amateur radio license, competing individually or in teams of up to 3. ARRL membership is free for full-time students, making participation accessible to students already active in amateur radio and those newly licensed. Parents, educators, and ARRL members involved in radio clubs, VE teams, and youth outreach are encouraged to share this opportunity with students who have an interest in software development or STEM learning. I'm John Ross, KD&IDJ.
Project submissions will be accepted between February 1st and March 31st, 2026, with source code and documentation submitted online. Winning entries will receive national recognition with total awards of up to $25,000 authorized by the ARRL Board of Directors. While pre-registration is optional, it is recommended to receive competition updates and reminders. Complete information is available at coding.arrl.org.
For amateur radio operators, adventure comes in all forms, whether it means landing on a remote island for a 2-week de-expedition or hiking to activate a Summit International Park. Others simply see adventure in the annual challenge to make that trip to Xenia, Ohio to attend Hamvention. Whatever your personal challenge is, it's in the spotlight this year, as Hamvention organizers have just announced that Radio Adventure is the theme for the 3 days from May 15th through May 17th at the Greene County Fairgrounds. Even if your biggest adventure ends up being your decision on what new rig to take home with you this year, expect the gates to be open as usual for a reunion among friends and your ham radio family.
The Supreme Court in the United States has decided to hear a case that puts the FCC's entire system for imposing fines under constitutional scrutiny, and could dramatically redefine how the agency enforces rules on pirate radio, emergency alert system compliance, and broadcast operations. At issue is whether the Communications Act allows the FCC to levy civil penalties without first providing a jury trial in an Article III court. FCC versus AT&T follows a Fifth Circuit ruling that vacated a $57 million fine against the communications giant, finding the Commission's internal forfeiture process unconstitutional under the Seventh Amendment and Article III, even though companies can later challenge unpaid fines in federal court. Meanwhile, President Trump first threw his support behind the bill that would require an AM radio in passenger vehicles when he took the stage at the 2024 National Religious Broadcasters International Christian Media Convention. "I will do my part to protect AM radio in cars," Trump told Christian broadcasters at the time. Now, the president is recommitting to that pledge. "I like the AM in every car bill," Mr. Trump said a few days past in an interview with Salem Radio Network's Hugh Hewitt. "I am in favor of it." It's interesting. A lot of people don't know about that, but it's actually a very big subject, a huge deal, and we're going to do something on that. During his earlier appearance at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, Trump acknowledged that AM radio was a critical outlet for his base.
NASA has selected 34 global volunteers to track the Orion spacecraft during the crewed Artemis II mission's journey around the moon. The Artemis II test flight will launch NASA's Space Launch System rocket, carrying the Orion spacecraft and a crew of 4 astronauts on a mission into deep space. The agency's second mission in the Artemis campaign is a key step in NASA's path towards establishing a long-term presence on the moon. While NASA's Near Space Network and Deep Space Network will provide primary communications and tracking services to support Orion's launch, the journey around the moon, and the return to the Earth, participants selected will be comprised of established commercial service providers, members of academia, and individual amateur radio enthusiasts. They'll be using their respective equipment to passively track radio waves transmitted by Orion during its approximate 10-day journey. These volunteers will submit their data to NASA for analysis, helping the agency better assess the broader aerospace community's tracking capabilities and identify ways to augment future Moon and Mars mission support. There are no funds exchanged as part of this collaborative effort. Artemis 2 will fly around the Moon to test the systems that will carry astronauts to the lunar surface. You can learn more about NASA's SCAN program on the web at nasa.gov/scan.
A major act of vandalism has disrupted production and shipping at the Dishtronics, Tentec, and Alpha RF Systems factory in Dayton, Ohio. According to company owner Mike Dishop, N8WFF, a group of thieves last month destroyed the factory's underground electrical infrastructure in order to steal the copper cable. The thieves extracted approximately 2,000 feet of half-inch copper cable weighing approximately 2,800 pounds, explained Dishop, with an estimated salvage value of $12,000 and a replacement cost of over $35,000. Dishop told the ARRL that power was restored on January 14th, a month after the break-in, but explained that this interruption has impacted the timing for everything we had on schedule by at least 3 months due to loss of time and capital. He says the police investigation is ongoing. In 2016, ARRL reported that Dishtronics had purchased the assets of amateur radio equipment manufacturer Tentec.
Amateur Radio Digital Communications, or ARDC, continues to accept grant applications from organizations aiming to advance the hobby of amateur radio and beyond. The next application deadline is just around the corner on February 1st, but 3 additional rounds of applications will be accepted later this year on April 1st, July 1st, and September 1st. ARDC makes grants to programs and organizations that aim to advance our mission and vision with strategic goals of getting more people learning, experimenting, and doing with amateur radio and digital communications technology. With the recent introduction of priority areas for funding, ARDC is especially interested in projects that align with the following areas: research and development, open hardware and software systems that enable learning and experimentation. For example, SDRs, open codec technologies, or new modulation techniques. Space-based communications, projects that create or expand access to satellite communications for amateur radio and digital communications, engaging communities in wireless communication. For example, GEO or HEO programs repurpose commercial satellites, space-based tools for learning. Open source education, scalable, open educational materials and hands-on projects that make amateur radio and digital communications more accessible, especially for new learners and clubs. ARDC welcomes proposals across the full range of amateur radio and digital communications, but projects that align with these areas remain a priority. You can learn more about applying for grants at the ARDC website.
A member bulletin emailed to ARRL members included highlights from the annual meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors, held in Windsor, Connecticut, January 16th and 17th, 2026. With more on the annual meeting, we go to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8 IDJ, files this special report.
ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, who was reelected, led the meeting and welcomed new division vice directors, including Carol Miazzo, KP4MD Pacific, Marty Newington, AG3L Atlantic, Mel Parkus, NM7P Rocky Mountain, and John Kitchens, NS6X Southwestern. Also elected were First Vice President Kristen McIntyre, K6WX, and International Affairs Vice President Rod Stafford, W6ROD. ARRL Foundation Treasurer Rick Neiswander, K7GM, was also elected as ARRL Second Vice President, succeeding Mike Ritz, W7VO, who held that position since 2024 and resigned on December 31st, 2025. The board also reelected David Minster, NA2AA, as Chief Executive Officer, and Secretary Diane Middleton, W2DLM, as Chief Financial Officer. Board committees met the day before. The Administration and Finance Committee approved the 2026 plan, later approved unanimously by the board, amending it to include additional funding for advocacy efforts in Washington, D.C. These efforts include continuing work to advance the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act through committee and towards final passage. ARRL launched a nationwide grassroots campaign last September aimed at securing passage of the bipartisan federal legislation that would grant amateur radio operators the same rights to install antennas on their property as those enjoyed by users of TV antennas, wireless internet, and flagpoles. The complete minutes of the 2026 annual meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors will be available soon on the ARRL website. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Board members discussed the final report from the Election Review Committee that was formed at the board's second meeting in July of 2022. They also heard a report from ARRL Foundation President David Norris, K5UZ, highlighting the Foundation's philanthropic support of amateur radio. In 2025, the Foundation awarded 171 scholarships, totaling approximately $800,000, made possible through the generosity of the private foundation, amateur radio, digital communications, individuals, and radio clubs. The foundation also awarded 35 grants totaling $60,580 and 2 division convention grants totaling $13,264. Several other actions advanced by committees included the creation of a new single-band DXCC, DX Century Club Honor Roll Award for qualifying operators. Commitments were also made to evaluate standardized reporting processes to streamline Section Traffic Manager and Amateur Radio Emergency Service monthly reporting, including broader adoption of the new Form 4 to improve the accuracy of reported volunteer hours. The complete minutes of the 2026 annual meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors will be available soon on the ARRL website. The next meeting is scheduled for July 17th and 18th of 2027.
ARRL will host the 9th Annual Ham Radio Science Citizen Investigation, or HAMSCI workshop, on March 14th and 15th, 2026, with primary activities held at Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, Connecticut, and additional events at ARRL headquarters in Newington. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with all the details.
The International Workshop brings together radio amateurs, scientists, educators, and students to explore how amateur radio serves as a practical tool for scientific research and citizen science. Organized by the HAMSCI community, the 2026 workshop carries the theme Discovering Science Through Ham Radio. Presentations and discussions will highlight real-world research enabled by amateur radio, including ionospheric and space weather studies, meteor scatter propagation, radio-based sensing technologies, and the growing use of personal space weather stations. The weekend will feature oral and poster presentations, invited tutorials, and sessions designed to be accessible to both newcomers and experienced researchers. A Saturday evening banquet will include a keynote address by astrophysicist Mark Kuchner, NASA's Citizen Science Officer. Attendees will also have the opportunity to tour ARRL headquarters, including the ARRL Laboratory, W1HQ Radio Laboratory, and W1AW, the Hiram Percy Maxim Memorial Station, with opportunities to get on the air. Amateur radio operators, educators, students, engineers, and citizen scientists are all encouraged to participate. A call for abstracts for presentations and posters is now open through February 1st, 2026, and registration is now available. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The program emphasizes how these efforts not only advance scientific understanding, but also directly inform and improve amateur radio operating and technology. While the workshop is planned primarily as an in-person event, a virtual attendance option is expected to be announced closer to the date. Additional details, including registration and abstract submission information, are available at hamsci.org/hamsci2026.
In the United Kingdom, the regulator Ofcom has proposed changes in radio spectrum that would make it Europe's first country to implement the sharing of the same frequencies between two different technologies. The proposal looks specifically at the upper portion of the 6 GigaHertz band, where priority usage would be given in one portion to Wi-Fi devices such as routers and another to mobile devices such as cell masts. Ofcom said the move to this so-called prioritized spectrum would most directly benefit businesses, households, and the UK economy in general. The change would affect indoor and lower power Wi-Fi and any higher power Wi-Fi under the control of the Automated Frequency Control System as protection against interference. The regulator will be accepting comments on the proposal no later than March 20th, 2026. Meanwhile, in the United States, the 6 GHz band is getting new users. The Federal Communications Commission intends to approve unlicensed operation on 6 GHz by a new category of devices known as GVP devices, which stands for Geo-Fenced Variable Power. The devices are commonly used with short-range hotspots, indoor navigation, automation, and augmented or virtual reality devices. A number of tech companies such as Apple, Microsoft, and Qualcomm have been advocating for the move. The FCC will grant the devices a higher power than previously permitted for other unlicensed devices and require them to use geofencing systems so they do not interfere with radio astronomers and fixed microwave links.
Region 1 of the International Amateur Radio Union has issued a clarification following reports of the prosecution of amateur radio operators in Belarus. In the statement, Region 1 stresses that amateur radio is a technical, educational, and service-oriented hobby defined internationally, and emphasizes that while the individuals involved hold amateur licenses, the actions leading to their prosecution fall entirely outside the scope of the amateur radio service. The clarification notes that an amateur radio license does not grant immunity from national laws and does not authorize use of equipment for activities that contravene the legal framework of a sovereign state, adding, "We believe the public narrative surrounding this case has been somewhat misplaced." Region 1 further states that it does not condone or support any actions by licensed operators that bypass legal requirements or violate the terms of their amateur license, and that the situation is a matter for the relevant judicial systems.
Kenya is set to make history in 2026 after being selected to host the Amateur Radio on the International Space Station program, a global initiative that enables the public to communicate live with astronauts aboard the International Space Station. The Kenya Space Agency announced the selection, positioning the country at the heart of an international effort to advance space education and public engagement in science. Kenya is the only African nation chosen for the 2026 ERA cycle, a milestone expected to spark interest in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and inspire innovation across the country. According to the agency, the hosting window will run between July and December 2026. During this period, Kenyan students, professionals, and members of the public will take part in live radio sessions with astronauts on the ISS. Participants will have the opportunity to ask questions and receive real-time answers about daily life in orbit, scientific research conducted on board, and the realities of living and working in space. The Kenya Space Agency will oversee preparations for the event in collaboration with Pan-African Citizen Science e-Laboratory mentor and agency liaison Harold Safari. Planning efforts will include technical coordination, public outreach, and the selection of participants with an open call to be issued for interested individuals and institutions wishing to take part in the live ISS contacts. Across Africa, space activity is gaining momentum, driven by advances in satellite technology, increased regional cooperation, and the establishment of the African Space Agency in 2025. Kenya's participation in ERAS reflects this growing ambition with a strong focus on public education and citizen involvement.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJB. I hope you successfully survived the blast of cold weather and snow that most of the nation got. We had 11 inches of snow here in southwest Ohio and have had a week of temperatures never rising above 15 degrees F. All of my antennas stayed up and operational, which means I need to get more aluminum in the air in 2026. You know the old saying, if it didn't come down last winter, it wasn't big enough. So there you go. I'd like to thank Adam Smith, Alpha 1 November, and the members of the Part of Westford Radio Club for their warm reception of our presentation last week. Joe, WAGEX, and I presented hints and tips for DXers to that club via Zoom. It was very well received with many excellent questions. We've had several presentations that we do, and we always appreciate the opportunity, and we really value the feedback. Thank you, Adam, for doing that. What a great club. They had over 70% turnout at their field day last year, which I think is just phenomenal. I received a couple of emails about the contest files that I put on my website so that you would have easy access to contests and events. I added a CSV file that can be imported directly into your Gmail account so you'll never miss one, and you can set up reminders. Use this at your own risk, however, as there are many variations and settings that pertain to Gmail calendar accounts that I couldn't possibly take into account. Feel free to download them and take a look at ajb.com/files. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, do what several others have done and drop me a line at thedxmentor@gmail.com. I'll get you fixed up. So from the Caribbean, we have information on an operator operating in V4, which is St. Kitts. The 425 DX News reports that Victor 47 Japan Alpha, which is operated by Whiskey 5 Juliet Oscar November, is QRV from the island until February 3rd on sideband and FT8. He's operating on HF bands. QSL direct to W5JON or use Logbook of the World. We have 3 countries that are being activated in Africa. The first 2 are Chad, which is Tango Tango, and the Central African Republic, which is Tango Lima. TJ1GD, Derek, has established permanent amateur radio stations in the Central African Republic, Tango Lima, and in Chad, Tango Tango, which are maintained locally. These stations, licensed to Derek, operate periodically, often over remote connection using FT8, CW, and sideband. QSL confirmations are available via LOTW and Club Log, and the Central African Republic is Tango Lima 8 Golf Delta, and Chad is Tango Tango 1 Golf Delta. And I was able to get Tango Tango 1 Golf Delta in the log this morning, which I was very happy about, as I have not been able to get Chad in the log since 2024. So I was glad to knock that one off the list for this year. Another country active in Africa is Guinea-Bissau, which is Juliet 5. Livio, IZ3 Boston Uniform Radio, is once again QRV as Juliet 52 EC starting January 24th, so he should be QRV by now. He has been reported on 10 and 15 meter sidebands. Numerous sources report that he is there until the end of March. QSL direct only via IZ3 Boston Uniform Radio. And again, it's IZ3BUR. From the South Pacific, we have news about Nauru, Charlie 2. Phil, FK1 Tango Sierra, is back on Nauru Island and expects to be active as C21TS on FT8 by the weekend, after setting up his vertical antenna. He will operate until July of 2026, and he will use Club Log live stream to indicate whether he is on or not. So if you get a chance to work Nauru, you need to do it. The 1D expedition that's been ongoing now for a couple of weeks is Deschisheo Island, which is Kilo Papa 5 stroke Nancy Papa 3 Victor India. They are now 2 weeks into their planned 30-day operation. Their latest published statistics are as follows: 29,418 QSOs with 8,291 unique call signs, and all-time new one for 166 stations. 6 continents are represented in the log, with 91.1% of the QSOs with North America and Europe. However, North American contacts continue to decrease in percentage as they increase activity with other regions. And they're right on our doorstep, being about 12 miles from Puerto Rico. So let's knock them out of the way in the first 2 weeks and give the rest of the world a chance. Another African country is the Gambia, Charlie 5. Charlie 5 SP and Charlie 5 MB are QRV from Gambia until March of 2026. So you got about 5 weeks. QSL cards are available via Sugar Papa 3 Papa Sierra direct, but not through LOTW. From the Solomon Islands, we have Bernard, Delta Lima 2 Golf Alpha Charlie, looking to operate from Hotel 4 in the Solomon Islands. He will be Hotel 44 Mike Sierra until mid-May. He departed India last Wednesday, arriving in the Solomons capital last Friday. He's renewing his H44 Mike Sierra license, which was scheduled to expire in early February. He will move to his, quote, usual QTH there tomorrow or Wednesday, so a couple days ago. He has taken with him a hex beam that covers 20 through 6 meters to replace his old tribander that covered 20 to 10 meters. So he's adding 6-meter capability. He says the weather is poor, lots of rain, no sunshine. He plans to be on 40 meters most of the time with a dipole 20 meters high in a palm tree near the ocean. Now, if it's all wet and rainy, you can't do much, so you might as well get on the air. So again, I mention this every week, but here's the one I'm most interested in. Bangladesh, Sierra 21 Whiskey Delta. Here's an update for this de-expedition. It's slated for late March. Philip, Delta Kilo 6 Sugar Papa, reports that the Next Generation DX Club has obtained the call sign Sierra 21 Whiskey Delta for its planned youth-focused de-expedition in late March. The team will operate for 12 days from the Kunai Barisal region IOTA group AS-140 at the end of March 2026. Watch for them on 160 meters through 10 meters, including 60 meters, and on CW, sideband, RIDI, and FT8. In addition, activity via the QO100 satellite is planned using CW, sideband, and FT4. 5 of the 6 operators are under 30 years old. The lone outlier is 46. That's terrific. So we have another update on Sable Island, Charlie Yankee 0S. Murray, Whiskey Alpha 4 Delta Alpha November, writes that, quote, Parks Canada Sable Island has invited the Charlie Yankee 0 Sierra team back to Sable Island for another de-expedition during March 2026, with official dates to be determined. The team's QRZ page says March 19th to the 31st, but if they say it's still be determined, that must be a best guess. The team, the same as for the 2024 CY9 Charlie trip, is authorized for 10 to 12 days de-expedition. More details will be on the de-expedition website, which is cy0s.com, their QRZ page, and from here. In closing, Adam notes that Sable Island is cold, windy, and snowy environment in March. It will be a challenge. Well, I have 2 more updates. One is on Agatti Island, India, which is Alpha Uniform 7 Radio Sierra, AU7RS. Quote, Dear DX chasers around the world, I am excited to share a major update regarding the AU7RS de-expedition. We've received fantastic news. Our license has been extended and we are in the process of securing fresh landing permits for the mission. Additionally, after a 45-day wait, our DX Commander antennas have finally been delivered by UPS. With all of our gear now in hand, we are finalizing our site location and propagation plans. All materials have reached Cochin and will be moved to Agatti Island shortly. Team AU7RS is ready. We will be live on the air from the Lakshadweep Islands soon, projected again for the first week of February, operating on the 6 meters through 160 meter bands, including QO100 satellite. We will have a specific focus on the 40, 80, and 160 bands for North America, as well as 10 meter single sideband. And that information came from the QSL manager, Charles M0OXO. So another update I have is on Bouvet Island, 3 Yankee 0 Kilo. Quote, due to unforeseen circumstances, the 3 Yankee 0 Kilo de-expedition to Bouvet Island will be delayed by approximately 2 weeks. Our vessel required additional maintenance to ensure it's fully prepared for the demanding voyage to one of the most remote and challenging locations on Earth. While this delay is disappointing, the safety of our crew remains our highest priority. The adjustment of dates does not change the overall strategy of the de-expedition, which has been carefully planned over the last 3 years. We will continue to keep you informed as our schedule is updated. 73's 3 Yankee 0 Kilo leadership. And it's another one I am really excited for those guys. Another one I just got wind about is Franz Joseph Island, Radio India 1 Fox. This will be for late August. The Russian DX team is preparing a major de-expedition to Franz Joseph Island, RI-1FJL, the northernmost DXCC entity in the world, located in the Arctic Ocean. A group of 6 operators will operate at least 5 high-power radio stations around the clock for 15 days, aiming to contact as many stations as possible, including those in distant regions and with low-power equipment. The team will depart from Murmansk, Russia on August 25th, traveling on an Arctic-ready sailing ship, with the journey expected to take 6 to 7 days, depending on weather and sea conditions. Their destination is Haight Island, where they hope to secure accommodations at the Geophysical Polar Observatory. The team anticipates challenging Arctic weather with temperatures below freezing, wind, and snow, and is making special equipment preparations. Operations will focus on 160 through 10 meter CW sideband and FT8, with real-time frequency updates available via the DX cluster. The equipment list includes multiple high-end radios, amplifiers, and specialized antennas designed for reliable, high-power performance under extreme condition. The de-expedition to Franz Joseph Land is costly with a budget of near $80,000. the team's highest yet. Each member covers individual expenses. Support through donations is essential to our success. Contributors of US $10 or more receive their first LOTW confirmation and a direct QSL card, while those donating 100 or more will have the call sign featured on the QSL card. I mentioned a minute ago about the KP5 expedition to Deschecheo, and they're racking up record numbers. If you would like to learn more about this expedition, check out the DX Mentor podcast and YouTube channel. AJB and WGEX have a great discussion with team leader Otis, Nancy Papa 4 Golf, about all aspects of the December expedition. Give it a listen and let me know what you think. I have one contest to update you on. On February 7th, the Minnesota QSO Party will be held. This is a fun event with lots of activities. The exchange is simple, signal, report, and state. Give it a go and let me know how you do. It runs from 1400 Zulu to 2400 Zulu on February 7th. I'll see you in the contest. And you can always contact me at thedxmentor@gmail.com or check out the WA7 BNM webpage for more information. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. On your amateur radio journey, you'll likely discover that many transceivers run on 13.8 volt DC, give or take. For example, my FT857D requires 13.8 volt plus or minus 15%, with a negative ground and a current draw of 22 ampere. More on that later. In other words, the power supply needs to be between about 11.7 and 15.9 volts. The same voltage that runs most vehicles, with some wiggle room for fluctuating alternator charging cycles. While some radios will absolutely fit in your car, there's plenty where that just isn't the case, even though they're set up for a 13.8 volt power supply. You might think of it as an anachronism, a few steps removed from spark gap transmitters, but there's more to the story. Most residential power grids run on AC power, at varying voltages and frequencies between 50 and 60 Hz. Across the world, there's 8 different AC voltages in use between 100 and 240 volts. Some countries use more than one combination, and I haven't even looked at three-phase power. Perhaps 13.8 volt DC isn't looking quite as odd. With this revelation comes the need to actually have 13.8 volt available in your shack. Converting your grid power to something you can plug your gear into requires some form of transformation, typically achieved with a power supply. Efficient, cheap, and plentiful, the switch mode power supply is the most common. Built to a price, they're also often noisy. Not just the fan, but noisy from a radio emissions perspective. Amateur radio has very sensitive receivers, and as a result you can often hear, or see if you have a waterfall display, RF birdies, a sound reminiscent of a budgie whistling every 100 kHz or so across the whole radio spectrum. Not something most other equipment cares about. So you're often left to fend for yourself in figuring out how to deal with this phenomenon. There's plenty of filtering techniques and circuits to be found, and some of them even work. But for my money, I'd spend it on a power supply that doesn't make noise in the first place. A regulated power supply maintains a constant output voltage or current, regardless of variations in load or input voltage. An unregulated power supply can wander all over the place. Adjustable power supplies allow you to set the voltage, amperage, or both, sometimes with knobs, sometimes using external controls. At this point, you might decide that this is all too hard, and you want to do away with all this complexity and use a sealed lead acid or SLA battery. After all, that's what the 13.8 volt is based on. But then you'll need to charge it. Similarly, picking any battery technology requires some form of charging. Another word for charger is power supply, often a switch mode one, and likely not filtered in any way that matters to you, since batteries, and for that matter solar power inverters, are unlikely to care about RF birdies. I will make mention of linear power supplies. When I started on this journey, this was the strong recommendation from my peers as the most desirable option. Although they are significantly less efficient than switch-mode power supplies, only 30% versus better than 80%, from an RF perspective, they're extremely quiet. Of course, the lack of efficiency reveals itself in the form of heat, which necessitates the application of cooling from a fan, often a very noisy fan. One potential source of power supply is a computer power supply unit, or PSU. Before you go down that route, consider that they're intended for installation inside a case, often generate various voltages at very specific current draws, and are not typically known for being RF quiet. After weighing up all the variables, I chose a laboratory-grade switch-mode current-limiting adjustable power supply. It's set to 13.8 volt, and it sits on my desk doing its thing. Rated at 1 to 15 volts at 40 ampere, it's now as old as I am in amateur radio terms, well and truly a teenager. It's also overkill, by quite a margin. Remember when I mentioned that my FT857D is rated at drawing 22 ampere? As a QRP or low power station, I typically use my transmitter set to 5 watt. But even when others use it at full power, I have never, ever seen it draw more than 12 ampere. That's not to say that it can't draw 22, I've just never seen it. As a benefit of having such a massive overkill in the specifications of my power supply, I can power more than one radio and not notice. Not that they're all transmitting at the same time, or using more than 5 watt, it just doesn't matter. I previously discussed setting a standard for coax connectors in the shack. The same is true for deciding what to pick for power supply connectors. In my case, I chose Anderson power pole connectors. Pins come in 15, 30 and 45 ampere ratings. Genderless and housings are available in many different colours. When I say genderless, it means that you can join two identical connectors. Within my shack, I use the RACES or ARES power pole wiring standard, and every single 13.8 volt connection uses it. If I get new gear that uses some other connector, I'll cut the power supply wire in half and terminate both the power supply and the cutoff cable using power pole connectors. That way my gear will connect to my own power supply and I'll have a universal adapter cable when I need it. Over the years I've collected an impressive array of adapters using this method, and it's helped immensely when sharing gear with other amateurs. Word of warning: make sure you get positive and negative the right way around when you join your power pole connectors, and make sure that you have the red and black housings the right way around too. You can thank me later. If you do this more than a few times, I'd recommend that you spend the money on a proper crimping tool. It makes the experience so much better. To avoid many of the pitfalls of interference whilst connecting power and coax to the same radio, try hard to avoid running both in parallel, or worse, joined to each other. Instead, attempt to run them in different directions, and only cross at right angles if you have to. One thing to consider is the ability to switch everything off immediately. To that end, I have a power switch on my desk that isolates all power to the equipment. You'll notice that I have not said anything about grounding or earthing. That's on purpose. Your laws and mine are not the same. Similarly, information you'll find online rarely, if ever, describes the jurisdiction it applies to. So, look at your own rules and implement accordingly. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
The fourth meeting of the World Radio Communication Conference Advisory Committee will be held on February 19, 2026, at the Federal Communications Commission in Washington, D.C. This fourth meeting of the WRC Advisory Committee will consider status reports and recommendations from its informal working groups concerning preparation for the 2027 World Radio Communication Conference, or WRC 27. At the fourth meeting, the WRC Advisory Committee will continue its work to finalize the recommendations for WRC 27 agenda items that do not yet have WRC Advisory Committee recommendation. This meeting is open to the public. The meeting will be broadcast live with open captioning over the internet from the FCC Live webpage at fcc.gov/live. There will be audience participation available during this meeting. The Commission's WRC 27 website contains the latest updated information and agendas on all scheduled meetings and advisory committee matters. Comments may be presented at the advisory committee meeting or in advance of the meeting by sending an email to wrc-27@fcc.gov.
The Northern Arizona DX Association has announced the dates for its 6th annual Pluto Discovery Anniversary event, February 14 through the 22nd. Using the call sign W7P, operations will be based at the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, set up in front of the new Marley Astronomy Discovery Center. Stations will be active daily as time and band conditions permit. This event commemorates the discovery of Pluto by Clyde Tombaugh at the Lowell Observatory in 1930. Operations will take place in a communications trailer with upgraded equipment. An ARRL grant is used to heat the trailer, and it can now run on solar power with 100-amp batteries. With over 100 inches of snowfall every year, NADXA members will also be operating from their home stations and from out-of-state locations to keep the event on the air. Tombaugh's nephew, Doug Tombaugh, November 3 PDT, and his team will be operating as W7P/0. Suggested frequencies are 14.266, 21.366, 28.366, and 7.266 megahertz. A certificate and a QSL card will be available.
A bipartisan agreement among lawmakers in the United States could restore the government's financial support of Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and other federally funded news services. The U.S. Congress in Washington, D.C., has reached a deal that would fund the Voice of America, giving its parent organization, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, an estimated $653 million. That figure is considerably lower than the annual $860 million provided previously to the agency. As described on the Radio World website, the funds would also pay for restoration of operations for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Radio Free Asia. A minimum of $30 million is earmarked for medium and shortwave programming by the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. The deal is part of a larger spending bill, the National Security Department of State and Related Programs Appropriations Act. It has the support of both parties in Congress, and its funding plan goes against the White House's executive order from last year, which shut the international news services down. Even if the measure receives final approval from the House and Senate, it will still require the president's signature.
The ARRL will announce the winner of the ARRL Sweepstakes ICOM Dream Station at Orlando Hamcation, coming to the Central Florida Fairgrounds February 13th through the 15th, 2026. Hosted by the Orlando Amateur Radio Club and serving as the ARRL Southeastern Division Convention, Hamcation features exhibits, technical and operating forums, a large flea market and tailgate area, and opportunities to meet ARRL officials and program representatives. Attendees can learn about initiatives including the ARRL Year of the Club and the America 250 Worked All States Award. A Saturday night banquet will include the presentation of Hamcation Awards and a keynote address from ARRL Senior Director of Marketing and Innovation, Bob Interbitson, NQ1R. Details and updates are available at hamcation.com.
Sharing news of AMSAT activities, especially the work of the AMSAT Engineering Department, is an important function that supports AMSAT's information and education mission. It is also an important tool for retaining current members, recruiting new members, and for fundraising. Frank Karnauskas, N1UW, AMSAT VP Development, is asking, do we have 2 volunteers who can step up and spend just a few hours a week to help keep our information channel flowing? For the feature story editors, we have a pool of information that we've collected from hamvention and symposium presentations that can quickly be converted into short stories for publication in the ANS weekly bulletins and into feature stories for the AMSAT journal. We typically start with a video or at least an audio recording of the presentation, which you would convert into a written transcript using an application that we provide. The editor then uses the transcript and author's original PowerPoint slides to create the final articles. We also have the need for someone to write press releases for other AMSAT activities, such as educational resources, the Youth Initiative, annual reports, and so on. For the video editor, again, we have a collection of videos from presentations that simply need opening titles to be added and a bit of tuning up inside the presentations themselves. There is no need for expensive software or especially super high-powered computers. Free software that is remarkably powerful but easy to learn is available. If a person is interested, we would also welcome someone to create promotional video shorts or other programs they are willing to create. We are not asking anyone for a lifelong commitment to these positions. Anyone who is willing to say, hey, I can do 5 or 10 stories would be a hero in my book. Persons interested in learning more about how they can make an important contribution can contact Frank at volunteer@amsat.org.
On December 28th last year, rapid hyperinflation of the Iranian rial, their monetary currency, saw shopkeepers implement a general strike, which soon spiraled into nationwide protests. With demonstrations gaining momentum at the start of 2026, the state implemented a nationwide internet blackout on January 8th. The blackout itself has seen Iran's internet traffic plummet. According to Internet Traffic Observation Company NetBlocks, Iran has seen a 98% drop in connectivity to the outside world. The shutdown was largely facilitated by Iran's telecommunication infrastructure company, which controls Iran's international gateways. The company has issued withdrawal messages to global routers, effectively making Iranian IP addresses unreachable from outside the country. It's reported, however, Starlink is being effectively blocked by the government, potentially by military-grade jammers being used to cripple the satellite constellation's effectiveness. Around 30% of Starlink's Iranian traffic was disrupted in the early hours of the protests, later rising to over 80%.
Nominations are now being accepted for the 2026 Dayton Hamvention Awards. Awards include Technical Achievement, Special Achievement, Amateur Radio Operator of the Year, and Amateur Radio Club of the Year. Nomination forms can be found at hamvention.org. The nomination process will close February 10th. An awards ceremony will take place on Saturday, May 16th, with winners announced on the website and at a celebration event. This year's Hamvention runs May 15th through the 17th at the Greene County Fair and Expo Center in Xenia, Ohio.
It's time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from All Over. The first story concerns a key antenna in NASA's Deep Space Network, or DSN, one that was damaged last fall. It's expected to remain offline until May. Then it will be taken out of service again later this year for major upgrades. The DSS-14 antenna, a 70-meter dish at the DSN complex in Goldstone, California, was damaged September 16th when it over-rotated, stressing cabling and piping. DSS-14 is one of 3 70-meter antennas in the Deep Space Network. The others are located near Madrid, Spain, and Canberra, Australia. The 70-meter antennas are used to communicate with distant spacecraft or those experiencing technical problems. And the final story, China suffered a pair of launch failures within 12 hours on January 16th and 17th. This included the loss of a classified Shenzhen satellite after a Long March 3B lifted off at 16:55 UTC from Xinjiang Satellite Launch Center in southwest China. The China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation confirmed the failure around 12 hours after liftoff, stating that the Shenzhen 32 satellite had been lost following a third-stage anomaly. Roughly 12 hours later, the Cirrus 2 lifted off at 0408 UTC on January 17th from Jingquan Satellite Launch Center in northwest China. Galactic Energy confirmed the loss of the debut flight, stating that an anomaly had occurred and that the specific cause is under further investigation.
Welcome to the 50th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, with thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website. As we prepare these segments, we bring you this next chapter of Ham Radio History. WWV. As the ARRL request in the summer of 1923, the Bureau of Standards announced that it would begin a schedule of broadcasts on precise wavelengths so that amateurs could calibrate their wave meters and receivers. The Bureau's station in Washington, D.C. ran a highly stable oscillator driving a 1 kilowatt power amplifier and had a proven record of being heard over a wide area, even on the West Coast. In print, its call sign, WWV, evokes the graphical visualization of a radio wave. On the air since 1920, WWV began as a source of news from the Department of Agriculture, broadcast on CW. It also experimented with Friday evening concert broadcasts. But in late 1922, its emphasis changed to transmitting standard frequency signals, something more in line with the Bureau's mission, primarily for the benefit of commercial stations. WWV had also conducted the QSS tests of 1920 jointly with amateurs when QST technical editor Robert S. Cruz was at the key in his dual role of government engineer and radio amateur. Now the Bureau would again collaborate with amateurs to promote precise frequency measurement and control. It planned to broadcast from July through October from Washington, D.C. on a schedule that would run from 11 p.m. until 12:41 a.m. Eastern Time, spending 8 minutes on each of 7 wavelengths between 705 and 200 meters. Amateurs were advised to mark their receiver settings for each one and then calibrate their wave meters to their receivers. In 1923, amateur radio receivers were still cumbersome to adjust. To illustrate, this is how one such tuning procedure was described in preparation for the broadcasts. In all receiving sets now available, the tuning is changed somewhat by any adjustment of the tickler, tuning switches, antenna condenser, filament rheostat, or anything at all. Therefore, take no chances, but get all prepared before WWV's schedule with a log sheet and a pencil to take down these adjustments. Then, when you hear WWV, loosen the coupling as much as possible and tune the secondary circuit very carefully to WWV's wave. Now note down the exact position of every movable adjustment on the set. Don't trust to memory. It is no good for the purpose. The broadcasts proved to be popular, and many amateurs took advantage of them. Cruz noted that for the first time a large number of amateurs are quite certain as to their wavelengths. The ARRL announced that a special standard wavelength test on the night of 7 October would be shifted later in the evening to give the West Coast a better chance at participating. It also asked the Bureau to continue its schedule beyond that month's planned end date. The Bureau agreed to continue them through February. Don't miss this chance to find out where 150 and 200 meters really are, wrote Cruz, and urged members to write to the Bureau to voice their support for making the broadcasts permanent. Knowing what wavelength you were on did not come easily in 1923, and these broadcasts help a lot. WWV's accuracy was 0.3%, 5 kilohertz at 200 meters, far better than the wave meters most amateurs owned. The test's format was described as a general call, i.e. QST, they WWV, a standard frequency dash, a long key-down period, and announcements. The call continued for 2 minutes, including the statement of the frequency, not wavelength, being used. The standard frequency dash was broken occasionally by the signature WWV and continued for about 4 minutes. Response to the test broadcasts was big enough for the Bureau to notice. By autumn, WWV had expanded their operation to include several frequencies between 125 and 2000 kilohertz, useful to both commercial stations and amateurs. Its 1 kilowatt CW station was also equipped with a 50-watt modulator tube and 5-watt speech amplifier for making phone announcements. Stanford University began similar transmissions at 0.3% accuracy to serve the West Coast from amateur station 6XBM. Both stations adopted the same 8-minute cycling pattern of operation. Each cycle consisted of a 2-minute general call, including a statement of the frequency, a standard frequency signal consisting of long dashes separated by call letters for 4 minutes, and announcements that included the measured frequency and the next frequency to be transmitted. A 4-minute period of retuning then preceded the next cycle. The idea also caught on in the UK, where station 5HW of the National Physical Laboratory at Teddington, England, began sending wavelength references between 833 and 5,000 meters. To augment the Bureau broadcasts with additional wavelength references for amateurs, the ARRL appointed 24 official wavelength stations, or OWLs, located across the country. At a lesser accuracy than the Bureau of Standard Stations, the OWLs did not operate on a set schedule of times or frequencies. They simply operated as usual and would identify using their call sign followed by a number specifying their wavelength. They were selected for their ability to maintain a frequency accuracy of 1% or 15 kilohertz at 200 meters. Living in the Baltimore area and being local to WWV, number 1YL Marion Adair Garmhausen, 3 BCK, paid a visit to the Bureau of Standards Radio Laboratory in early 1924 and described the station for QST with her usual humor. Impressed with a transmitter in a rack at least 8 feet high by about 3 feet wide and an antenna system complete with a counterpoise to bring tears of joy to the eyes of the city cliff dweller, she was even more impressed with the staff. A good-looking young man with curly hair was winding a coil, or maybe he was shining a shoe, we don't know. The young man smiled. He had nice white teeth. We took a sudden, frenzied interest in WWV. The transmitter consisted of speech amplifier, 3 250-watt power tubes, various inductors, capacitors, and batteries. A separate rack of metering and switching equipment was nearby, along with receivers, test equipment, and parts galore. And every time the young man smiled, we felt our interest in WWV mount, whereas our curiosity regarding the rest of the laboratory dwindled to nothing, she added. After stalling for time with transmitter questions that were very likely redundant, she was ushered on by her guide, Miss Elizabeth M. Zandonini, OW of D.C. How that girl manages to keep all that information in one head is a mystery to us. It may have been mere chance, of course, or perhaps our guide had ulterior motives, but we were unceremoniously bundled out of the room after only the 4th explanation of the transmitter, and were forced to inspect the other rooms, she lamented. Included in this material are quotes from the following. U.S. will send standard waves for ARRL, QST, July 1923, page 28. R.S. Cruz, hundreds of wave meters being calibrated, QST, October 1923, page 14. New schedules for WWV standard waves, QST, November 1923, page 26. Good work of Buston continues, QST, January 1924, page 25. WWV schedules, QST, March 1924, page 36. H.J. Walls, the standard frequency set at WWV QST, October 1924, page 9. Standard waves for both coasts at last, QST, October 1924, page 27. Extension of standard radio frequency transmissions, QST, November 1924, page 51. English station transmits standard waves. International Amateur Radio, QST, September 1924, page 53. Official Wavelength Stations, QST, March 1925, page 17. M.A. Garmhausen, WWV at Home, QST, March 1924, page 25. With our appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for the use of his website, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. This week we have an update on FO-29. FO-29 was launched August 17, 1996. Shortly, it will have its 30th birthday. It is still operational, however, when not in full sun, it is only operational based on a schedule to keep the satellite healthy. Around March 9th, it should return to full sunlight, possibly allowing the transponder to operate 24 hours a day. The February passes when the transponder will be active are the 6th and 7th, 13th and 14th, 20th and 21st, 27th and 28th. It looks like the 2200 to 2300 UTC passes on those days are favorable. The downlink is 435.800 through 435.900 MHz USB, while the uplink is 145.900 through 146.000 MHz LSB. As satellites age, interesting things start to occur. Batteries degrade, memory begins to corrupt, other components start to fail. While the ground stations do their best to modify schedules, keeping the batteries at optimal performance through monitoring the telemetry, at some point the satellite will cease to function. Then you have other interesting things that could happen, such as AO7, whose batteries failed and later shorted, allowing the sun to power up the satellite. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's look at the solar weather forecast and the terrestrial propagation forecast. Solar activity continued at low levels this week. Low-level C-class flares were observed from regions 4342 and 4353. The majority of the regions were either stable or in decay. New regions 4359, 4360, and 4361 emerged on the disk and were numbered. No Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed. The forecast calls for solar activity to remain at low levels with a chance for M-class minor to moderate flares through January 31st. Solar wind parameters reflected a solar sector boundary crossing, followed by the likely onset of high-speed stream conditions. On January 27th, the phi angle switched into a negative sector. Solar wind speed began to increase after January 28th to around 610 kilometers per second. Enhancements in the solar wind environment are expected through January 31st under negative polarity coronal hole high-speed stream influences. The geomagnetic field is expected to remain at quiet to unsettled levels on January 31st and quiet levels on February 1st. Solar activity is expected to be predominantly low, with a varying chance for M-class minor to moderate flares through February 21st. No proton events are expected at geosynchronous orbit. In the coming days, solar and geomagnetic activity should continue to decline. The next increase in geomagnetic activity can be expected in the middle of the first week of February, but this time without the major influence of high-speed solar wind. Therefore, only a decrease in critical frequencies and an increase in attenuation are expected in the ionosphere until February 6th, followed by a return to average values as expected. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation forecast page of Carl Wetzelswab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOA-CAP VOACAP online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, January 31st, the UBA-DX contest, that's a single sideband. February 1st, North American single sideband sprint contest, that's phone. February 3rd, the ARS Spartan Sprint, CW. February 4th, the UKE ICC 80-meter contest, CW as well. February 5th through the 6th, the Walk for the Bacon QRP contest, that's CW. And February 7th and 8th, the Labrie RS Digi contest, that is digital. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions, January 30th through the 31st, the Jackson MS Capital City Hamfest, ARRL Mississippi State Convention, that's in Jackson, Mississippi. February 7th, the Hendricks County Hamfest hosting the ARRL Indiana Section Convention in Danville, Indiana. February 13th through the 15th, Orlando Hamcation hosting the ARRL Southeastern Division Convention, that's in Orlando, Florida. And on February 20th through the 21st, the Greater Houston Hamfest hosting the ARRL Texas State Convention in Rosenberg, Texas. And remember to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find events in your area.
The Alberta Digital Radio Society is pleased to announce that it has chosen orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, known as OFDM, as the modulation method for the enhanced data mode on its IP400 supernode. This mode will enable higher data rates than have been previously achieved with conventional FM radios, says Martin Alcock, VE6VH, founder of the IP400 project. Alcock goes on to say it will provide us with the ability to extend the network to a mobile station on a conventional repeater, which can be in either the 2-meter, 220, 440, and 900 bands, and with no radio modifications required. The goals of the IP400 project are not only to implement a higher speed mesh network on the 400 MHz band, but also to breathe new life into analog repeaters with a simple data upgrade, which will result in the addition of 3 modes, a 4F-SK compatible mode on 400 MHz and a high-speed OFDM mode at 2.39 GigaHertz for linking and backbone purposes, and a slower audio band OFDM mode that is designed to work with existing VHF and UHF radios. The IP400 supernode is now entering its development phase. This node provides a data upgrade with 2 native modes, a compatible 4F-SK mode on 400 MHz, a high-speed OFDM mode on the 2.9 GHz band for backbone data network implementations, combined into a single RF modem. The hardware will be a HAT module for existing Raspberry Pi systems, which can operate either in a standalone mode or as a simple upgrade to an existing All-Star Link system. A third data mode is currently in the design phase, which will enable IP400 traffic on conventional FM radios. Copies of the specification are available on the developer GitHub site or to members upon request. The OFDM mode development is being sponsored by a grant from Amateur Radio Digital Communications.
The winter weather has subsided, and now 580 students at Con Magnet Elementary School in Raleigh, North Carolina, have participated in a conversation with an astronaut on board the International Space Station. With all the details, we go to our field reporter, John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
Amateur radio on the International Space Station, ARDC, has confirmed the contact, scheduled for Friday, January 30th, 2026, just after 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Radio communications will be provided by the Raleigh Amateur Radio Society under the leadership of John Breyer, K4EB. This contract could not have been possible without a $14,000 grant from Amateur Radio Digital Communications, ARDC, said Breyer. The new equipment, which is in cases and movable, will allow us to provide communications for other schools in the area, Breyer added. And he also said that club members are being trained to operate the gear, and it can be loaned to other clubs for use in future ARDC contacts. Friday's contact will be with NASA astronaut and medical physicist Christopher Williams, KJ5GE. 12 students will be asking questions, 2 in each grade level, from kindergarten through 5th grade. All 12 students will be wearing special T-shirts designed by a second grader who won the school's T-shirt logo contest. Students also had a chance to create a logo for a keychain, and there was a winner for each grade. Every student will get their grade level keychain to mark the ARDC event. And that event will be live streamed on the ARDC YouTube channel. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
ARDC is a cooperative venture of international amateur radio societies and the space agencies that support the International Space Station. In the U.S., participating organizations include NASA's Space Communications and Navigation, or SCAN program, the ISS National Laboratory, Space Station Explorers, the ARRL, and AMSAT.
The pilot of a private plane that crashed north of Australia's Gold Coast has been identified as an amateur radio operator and successful businessman. He was well known for the ham radio equipment business he built decades earlier from a garage-based operation. The single-engine plane had just taken off from a private airstrip on Tuesday, January 27, when it came down, killing the pilot and his passenger at the scene. The pilot was identified as Greg Ackman, VK4BBX, owner of Mobile One Australia. Various news reports described him as an experienced aviator. His passenger was said to be from Sydney. According to media reports, the two were on their way to New South Wales. Greg designed much of the amateur equipment sold by the company that he founded. A ham since 2021, he was a visible presence at amateur radio events throughout Australia. As we come to the air, investigators are still trying to determine the cause of that crash. Greg was 73.
It's not time to turn the clocks just yet here in the U.S. We take a 1 hour leap forward in a few weeks. It is, however, time to turn back the calendar in just a few days and revisit amateur radio's first voice mode. You see, long before there was single sideband, there was AM, or amplitude modulation, the only HF voice mode available to previous generations of amateur radio operators. AM operators are still on the air, holding nets and having QSOs, although AM's rich, warm tones are heard less often on the bands these days. That's about to change. From 0000 UTC on Saturday, February 7th, through 0700 UTC on Monday, February 9th, everyone gets a chance to be part of this annual operating event. Any type of radio equipment will get you in the game as long as it is capable of full carrier amplitude modulation. The action will take place on 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, 10, and 6-meter amateur radio bands. For details about the different power categories, rig categories, or operating procedure, visit the website amrally.com. If you are a newcomer to operating on AM, there's plenty of information there to help you get started.
Whiskey Bravo Zero, Oscar Echo Whiskey, Elwood Downey, the developer and creator of the popular open-source ham clock software, has become a silent key. The popular Linux-based digital information display has been a mainstay in amateur radio shacks, where hams have eagerly awaited updates and new versions. The revelation that Elwood had become a silent key on Thursday, January 29th, was accompanied by a message on his ClearSkyInstitute.com website. It announced his death, adding that the final release of ham clock is version 4.22. All ham clocks are to stop functioning in June of this year. In a separate posting on Facebook, Bruce Kempf, Kilo Charlie 3, Juliet Sierra, announced that he was halting all sales of turnkey ham clocks until there is a functioning replacement. He asked for fellow ham clock enthusiasts to help find a means to get a functioning server and edit the code to allow this to work. Meanwhile, a noted DXpeditioner and active member of the Intrepid DX group has become a silent key. David Asif III, Whiskey 5, X-Ray Uniform, had a long amateur radio life, which began when he was still in high school. It gathered momentum and more of a spirit of adventure over time. The DXpeditioner was 71 years old when in 2016 he activated South Sandwich Island with the Intrepid DX group as Victor Papa 8, Sierra Golf India, and Tula Island as Victor Papa 8, Sierra Tango India, in a place uninhabitable except by penguins. He became a silent key on January 18th, according to his online obituary. David, who discovered ham radio as a high school electronics enthusiast, would go on to a lifetime of other discoveries and many DXpeditions, including Russell Reef as 9 Mike 0 Whiskey and Mellish Reef, 9 Mike 6 Mike Alpha. An active member of the Baton Rouge Amateur Radio Club, his commitment to helping his Louisiana community spurred him into service by assisting emergency communications during Hurricane Betsy in 1965, an action for which the city of New Orleans honored him. David was 80 years of age.
Edward Temporal has shown how his proprietary neuromorphic engine, Ghost Hunter Anti-LIF, is being used to recover satellite data buried in the noise floor. which typical DSP methods would fail to do. To recover the signals, Edwin uses trained spiking neural networks, or SNN. SNNs are artificial neural networks that draw further inspiration from nature by incorporating the spiking on or off behavior of real neurons. Edwin writes, "My engine has successfully extracted and decoded structured data from high complexity targets by mimicking biological signal processing. For instance, Technosat successfully decoding of a GFSK modulation under extreme frequency drift and low SNR conditions. And the MIT RF Challenge, advanced recovery of the QPSK signals, where traditional digital signal processing often fails to maintain synchronization. These missions are fully documented. These records serve as a public ledger for my signal recovery operations. Furthermore, the underlying anti-LIF architecture is academically backed by my publication on TechRXIV, proving its efficiency in processing signals buried deep within the noise floor. In the database, Edwin shows how his anti-LIF system has recovered CW Morse code telemetry and QPSK data from noisy satellite signals. While Edwin's anti-LIF is proprietary, he is offering proof of concept decoding. If someone has a 250 megabyte or less IQ, SIG-MF, or wave recording of a signal that is buried in the noise floor, they can submit it to him via his website and he will run anti-LIF on it for analysis. Advanced readers interested in AI and neural network techniques for signal recovery can also check out his white paper on TechRXIV, where he shows signal recovery from signals buried in Wi-Fi noise, as well as results from use in ECG and healthcare applications.
Even as parts of the United States, including the New England states, were suffering through days of sub-zero freezing temperatures recently, a dedicated group of park activators in Connecticut had a good warm feeling, and they headed to the park to celebrate by getting on the air. So, if you happen to work WB1CT on the first morning of the new year, you are part of the inaugural Parks on the Air log of the Connecticut Parks on the Air Activators Group. The club has been around and growing since its first informal activities in early 2021. Until recently, most of their hunters are more familiar with their previous call sign, K2D, the special event one-by-one call sign it's shared with the Connecticut operators in the 13 Colonies event each July. Group Director Conrad Troutman, N2YCH, said recently that as the group grew larger and added even more activities, it made sense to become an official nonprofit club, which it did in late 2025. The FCC granted the club call sign shortly afterward. With a special park-to-park net that helps activators get more Connecticut parks in their logs, the club continues to evolve both in activities and in membership. The group has more than 100 POTA activators throughout the state. When they're not on the air, they keep in touch regularly via a groups.io list. Be listening for WB1CT calling CQ POTA, or if you happen to live in Connecticut, join in the action. You can find details on the club's page on QRZ.com.
The Hubble Space Telescope, which has radically changed our understanding of the universe for more than 3 decades, is nearing the end of its mission. Due to atmospheric drag, its orbit is steadily decreasing, threatening to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. According to new calculations presented at a meeting of the American Astronomical Society, this could happen as early as 2033, and in a pessimistic scenario, even as early as 2029. Launched in 1990 at an altitude of about 579 kilometers, the Space Telescope has fallen more than 50 kilometers over the years of its service. Although NASA periodically adjusted the observatory's orbit, the main factor is atmospheric drag. The density of the upper layers of the atmosphere varies depending on the activity of the sun. The current period of high solar activity is accelerating the fall. If the altitude falls below 400 kilometers, there will be only a year left before the final entry into the atmosphere.
The amateur radio on the International Space Station program is seeking formal and informal education institutions and organizations, individually or working together, to host an amateur radio contact with a crew member on board the ISS. ARDC anticipates that the contact would be held between July 1, 2026 and December 31, 2026. Cruise scheduling and ISS orbits will determine the exact contact dates. To maximize these radio contact opportunities, ARDC is looking for organizations that will draw large numbers of participants and integrate the contact into a well-developed education plan. The deadline to submit a proposal is February 27, 2026. Proposal information and more details, such as expectations, proposal guidelines, and the proposal form, can be found at www.aris.org. An informational webinar session will be held on February 5, 2026 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Crew members aboard the International Space Station will participate in scheduled amateur radio contacts. These radio contacts are approximately 10 minutes in length and allow students to interact with the astronauts through a question and answer session. An ARDC contact is a voice-only communication opportunity via amateur radio between astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the space station and classrooms and communities. ARDC contacts afford education audiences the opportunity to learn firsthand from astronauts what it is like to live and work in space and to learn about space research conducted on the ISS. Students also will have an opportunity to learn about satellite communication, wireless technology, and radio science. Because of the nature of human spaceflight and the complexity of scheduling activities aboard the ISS, organizations must demonstrate flexibility to accommodate changes in dates and times of the radio contact. Amateur radio organizations around the world, with the support of NASA and space agencies in Russia, Canada, Japan, and Europe, present educational organizations with this opportunity. The ham radio organization's volunteer efforts provide the equipment and operational support to enable communication between crew on the ISS and students around the world using amateur radio. Please direct any questions to education@ariss-usa.org.
A new web-based tool for the amateur radio community, SpottedHam.com. It is launched to provide hams with a more granular way to monitor the bands. Unlike traditional clusters, Spotted Ham allows users to create custom watch lists for specific call signs, parks on the air references, or specific bands and modes. The system monitors live spotting data and sends an immediate email notification to the user the moment a match is found. This is particularly useful for operators chasing specific park references or monitoring the activity of friends and local club members. Developer Robert Campbell, KM6HBH, designed the tool to be mobile first, ensuring that activators in the field and operators in the shack have a clean, clutter-free interface. The service is currently free to use and supports global spotting data, including United Kingdom and European parks on the air references. Interested operators can find the live spotting table, an easy way to spot themselves, and sign up for alerts at www.spottedham.com.
Determined to preserve Taiwan's citizens' ability to communicate despite ongoing damage to underwater internet cables, many Taiwanese are pursuing the wireless option of amateur radio. Here's the story. Last summer, a court in Taiwan gave a 3-year prison sentence to the Chinese captain of a ship registered in Togo after he was convicted of deliberately damaging Taiwan's underwater cables. Though that high-profile case in the justice system appeared to settle one incident, Taiwan remains challenged by such ongoing damage, which cuts the island off from the rest of the world. Taiwan is also embroiled in ongoing tensions with Beijing, which claims the self-ruled territory as its own. Recent media reports say that amateur radio is being seen as Taiwan's wireless workaround to maintaining connectivity. A civil defense group there has been providing ham radio instruction to prepare candidates for their operating licenses. Although there is already an amateur radio presence in Taiwan, represented by the Chinese Taipei Amateur Radio League, these newest candidates are pursuing license status, especially because of the damage being done to the cables. Their hope is to be able to step in and maintain communications if Taiwan is cut off from the internet. More than 90% of Taiwan's internet traffic is carried by 15 international and 10 domestic communication cables.
Competitors and volunteers are getting ready for the 2026 World Radio Sport Team Championship in July, but organizers are also looking a bit further down the road to 2030. A competition of sorts is taking place among would-be hosts for the 2030 World Radio Sport Team Championship, and the organization's sanctioning committee has set a deadline of February 15th to receive letters of intent. The letters should include the proposed time frame and location, the estimated budget with fundraising plan, and identify the officers and organizing committee. Letters of intent or questions about the host selection process should be sent to Doug, K1DG, at gmail.com. The committee would like to announce the next host during the closing ceremony of WRTC 2026 in July in the United Kingdom.
All eyes, it seems, are on the Artemis II moon rocket since its recent rollout onto the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. From high above the Earth, another pair of eyes and the lens of a camera have been watching too. From his front row seat aboard the International Space Station, NASA astronaut Chris Williams, KJ5GEW, got the best view of all of the Artemis II as it awaits its crew of 4. Chris was able to capture the image on camera. He posted it on the social media site X on Monday, January 19th. Alongside the image, he wrote, "If you zoom in on the rightmost launch pad, you can see a shadow just to the left of center on the pad. That shadow is from the rocket and launch tower that will soon take 4 of my friends on a trip around the moon. They're not just his friends and fellow astronauts. Just like Chris, 3 of them have their ham radio licenses. Commander Reed Wiseman, KF5LKT, Pilot Victor Glover, KI5BKC, and Mission Specialist Jeremy Hansen, KF5LKU. The 4th crew member is Mission Specialist Christina Koch. The crew's launch toward the moon could come as early as February. Though Chris is scheduled to stay aboard the ISS for a few more months, once Artemis is launched, the crew won't come by for their close-up. The journey is expected to last 10 days before it splashes down in the Pacific Ocean.
This week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the world on the internet, on low-power FM stations, and on great repeater systems like the WB3GXW repeater on 147.225 MHz in Silver Springs, Maryland, serving all of Silver Springs and also covering the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. WB3GXW can also be found on Echolink Conference Server Node 6154. If you are a This Week in Amateur Radio affiliate and you would like us to give a free on-air announcement of your station's carriage of the program, please send us an email with the station location, call sign, coverage area, and day and time you air This Week in Amateur Radio, plus any other information you would like us to impart. You can send to the following email, w2xbs77@gmail.com. That address once again is w2xbs77@gmail.com. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia, and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.